Resuming debate, the honourable member Calgary-Midnapore.
Here, here.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It is always a pleasure to rise in this House of Commons to speak on behalf of the wonderful constituents of Calgary-Midnapore. Before I get too far into my speech, Madam Speaker, I would like to indicate I will be splitting my time with the member, a fellow Albertan, the member for St. Albert, Edmonton. Madam Speaker, I'm going to tell you something that you know, that your constituents know, that my constituents know, and that all of Canada knows, and that is that Canada is in an economic crisis. Without question, Canada is in an economic crisis. We see record inflation rates, and we've certainly seen this across all consumer products, most specifically food, where we saw a 40% hike in food across Canada, something that, of course, all Canadians need, all families rely upon to put food on their table, a 40% inflationary increase in food, as well as clothing, home heating, all of these things. We have seen horrific interest rates as a result of this government's spending. They're out of control spending, and at every single opportunity that they have, they throw more fuel on the inflationary fire, as we saw this week with the fall economic statement. Anyone who is currently trying to renew their mortgage, as was brilliantly pointed out by my leader, the member for Carleton, is now in a crisis as they attempt to get the best rate possible, as they attempt to hold on to their homes, since mortgage rates have doubled and rental rates have doubled, Madam Speaker. We, of course, are in a housing crisis with this government having the failed housing accelerator plan, building, I believe at the last count, like 15 homes in the last fiscal year, like an absolutely shameful number, very shameful. And so what do, Madam Speaker? They bring forward this bill, C-56. You have hope when you hear that there is a fiscal bill on the horizon. You hope that somehow they will get the message. They will do something sweeping for Canadians, something that will move the dial, something that will make even a small change in the life of Canadians. And what do they do in this bill, Madam Speaker? They put forward a bill with, wait for it, two measures. Inflation, interest, housing crisis. And they put forward a bill with two small measures. And so the theme here, Madam Speaker, is the same as it always is. This government could be doing so much more to help Canadians. But they consistently do the minimum. They consistently make the choices that harm Canadians, Madam Speaker. And this bill is another example of that, where they did the tiniest thing possible in the face of economic crisis across this country. They did two things. Madam Speaker, I'm sure you're aware, as of most recently, the deficit this year was at $46.5 billion, where the President of the Treasury Board and the Finance Minister themselves were off by over $6 billion. Certainly, $6 billion is just an absolute incredible amount, but this shows you the lack of respect that they have for the Canadian taxpayer and the money of Canadian taxpayers, Canadians who work so hard to bring home this money, and they can't even get it right in a single year where they're off by $6 billion. And in fact, the deficit will be going up an average of $4 billion a year through fiscal year 2028, 2029. And this is the year, Madam Speaker, to put this into context, that my son, who's now 12, is going to graduate from high school, that he can hope to see some, at least, of possibility that this government might balance the budget, might get out of deficit, is 2028. But this government is simply, as we've seen, is incapable of that by putting forward Bill C-56 with two small measures. Madam Speaker, recently, the Parliamentary Budget Officer was at the Government Operations Committee, and he's actually returning today to discuss the supplementary estimates. I'm sure he will give us lots of good information. Last time he came to the Government Operations Committee, Madam Speaker, he didn't have very positive things to say about this government and their fiscal management in this time of economic crisis. I asked the parliamentary budget officer if the government reduced spending, would they have to rely less on nominal GDP, another area that is suffering, the productivity of Canada. So in addition to having a spending problem, this government has a productivity problem. As my leader said, Canadians just want to work. They just want to get to work. But he did say, if I was asking if the government could spend less, if they spent less, if they could reduce taxation, he said the answer was yes. Not surprising, Madam Speaker, as we see this government's obsession with taxation, including the carbon tax, which has now quadrupled. And they will go to any extent, Madam Speaker, as we have seen, in an effort to support this carbon tax, which we saw by the Minister of Rural Economic Development, who admitted that if other Canadians had just supported the governing party, then they too might get this carve out and get this exemption from the carbon tax. And this is the way that this government operates, Madam Speaker, is they can't manage their finances, they can't increase productivity for Canadians, and just the level of corruption, Madam Speaker, that we are seeing, as is evidenced by the comment from the Minister of Rural Economic Development there. So as I said, Madam Speaker, this government could be doing so much more. Madam Speaker, on October 15th, the President of the Treasury Board, my counterpart, said she was going to find $15 billion, $15 billion, a tiny little drip in the bucket, by October 2nd. You know, $15 billion, as we've seen, isn't even a quarter of the deficit currently. But October 2nd came, October 2nd went, and what was announced? Nothing. Oh, wait a minute, one thing. $1 billion removed from our defense budget at a time where we have significant instability in the world, with the war on Ukraine, with what we are seeing currently in the Middle East, and of course with Taiwan continuously under threat from the aggressor China. So even she was not able to keep her promise of finding $15 billion, a tiny drop in the bucket, Madam Speaker, by her imposed date of October 2nd. So if the deficit is going up an average of $4 billion a year, that doesn't even negate the increase in the deficit. And as I said, the President of the Treasury Board didn't even meet her own target. So as I said, Madam Speaker, and I'll say it again, this government with C-56 had the opportunity to be doing something significant for Canadians, and they chose not to, and they could be doing so much more. As I said, Madam Speaker, we will have the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer in Government Operations Committee today, where I should ask, the government is coming to seek approval of another $20.7 billion of spending, Madam Speaker, in the supplementary estimates. Just more than a significant amount, a horrific account. And guess what they have spent a huge sum of money on? Not surprisingly, unfortunately, consultants and consulting services. Myself and my Conservative colleagues, we tried to raise the alarm last year with McKinsey, not only the amount being spent on consultants, but how, in fact, this government does not take their instructions from their constituents, as we do on this side of the House, but they do from their Liberal insider friends, Madam Speaker. So we've seen this as well. But as I said, the spending on professional and special services continues to increase, and in fact, it will be a record $21.6 billion, Madam Speaker, in this fiscal year, in addition to this significant deficit that I have mentioned. And again, it will probably only increase based upon the spending requests from the supplementary estimates. And then, of course, Madam Speaker, so we have failure with, over the last years, after 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, failure with the supplementary estimates. And then we're looking for hope in the fall economic statement. Is it there? No, it's not. More disappointment, Madam Speaker, as we see another $20 billion of fuel on the inflationary fire. Madam Speaker, we have seen this time and time again. This government has a spending problem. They have a productivity growth problem. They have no leadership in Canada or in this world. With C-56, I conclude, Madam Speaker, they could be doing so much more, but again, they chose to do nothing. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, speaking of problems, the Conservative Party has a problem with truth. And, you know, you listen to what the member is saying and you'd wonder, what the heck is she talking about? Because that's about the fall economic statement from yesterday. Today's legislation is substantial legislation that is going to support Canadians from coast to coast to coast. It is substantial. It ensures that they're going to see thousands and thousands and thousands of new rental purpose-built homes constructed. It's going to ensure a fairer sense of competition, Madam Speaker, by ensuring that there's going to be more choice into the future. These are the type of substantive measures that the Government of Canada is taking in order to support Canadians. Yet we get the Conservative Party in that reckless fashion, going all over the place, listening to the far right, Madam Speaker, and not listening to what Canadians have to say. My question to the member is, when is the Conservative Party, in particular the leadership of the Conservative Party, going to get out of the right wing and start listening to what Canadians are saying coast to coast to coast? Let's get behind and support this legislation. Will she vote for the legislation, yes or no?
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
You know, Madam Speaker, what I really don't appreciate in this House is being lumped into a group. This is absolutely an effort to scapegoat, to divert from their horrific record, which is in every single area of society, every single area of the economy. You know, I don't appreciate that at all. We are here today talking about these two little pieces which are supposed to help housing. We know that the Housing Accelerator Fund has been a complete failure. As my leader said yesterday, 1 year, okay, we'll give you that. 2 years even, 3 years even, 8 years, and housing is a failure. These two little pieces aren't going to help Canadians. And again, I don't appreciate them diverting with name-calling at a time where Canadians are facing the greatest economic crisis we've had in decades, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member of North Island, Powell River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for doing the important work in the House of sharing opinions, which I think is important. I just read a report from Oxfam just the other day that talked about the fact that the top 1% earners across the planet are sending out as much emissions as the lowest 66%. So obviously, if we don't actually have things in place to support people, we see that they are really not getting the benefit. And I really appreciate this bill because it talks about getting resources to people who desperately need it right now. Not as far as I would go. I have a lot of other ideas that I would love to see, and we've mentioned them in the House. I'm just wondering if this member could talk about why a windfall tax is so important, because we know there are businesses that are making a huge amount of profit while so many are suffering. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much to my colleague from North Powell Island River for this question. And, you know, I think there's an important point here. We both agree that this government has failed on the environment. Everyone in this House knows they have not met a single target to which they ascribe. But on our side of the House, Madam Speaker, we believe that we can have a plan for the environment as well as have industry functioning. We can fire on all cylinders because, as I've said, they failed on both spending as well as productivity in Canada, whereas the member, unfortunately, given her hand-in-hand work with her coalition partner, the Liberal government, she believes that we need more taxation, and that's just not our position on this side of this House, Madam Speaker.
For a brief question, the Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
For an excellent speech. She talked about housing and she mentioned the Accelerator Fund. I wondered if she was aware that that fund has been closed since August 18th of this year, and so there's no further money coming forward and no further money announced until 2025-26.
Brief answer from the honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Yeah, and this is what we have seen again time and time, Madam Speaker, and actually my colleague from Sarnia-Lambton knows well, since she is the only member of Parliament to have gotten 2 private members' bills through the House to Royal Ascension, one of them, which was the palliative care bill. So my point is, she, as well as myself, as well as everyone in this House, sees bill after bill with structures, ideas, ideologies, but they never deliver any results. They never put any meat on the bones, Madam Speaker. I'm sick of it. We're sick of it. Canadians are sick of it, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much.